Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, Azkriel here, and today we're going to take a look at Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord. The game is huge, so take a load off, get comfortable, relax, and let's dive right into it. So what makes Mount & Blade 2 so good? Or, more importantly, as it's still in alpha, what gives Mount & Blade the possibility of so much potential to become something truly special? But before we can answer that question, we've got to ask another one. What on earth is it? Mount & Blade 2 Bannerlord is a medieval sandbox action role-playing game with strategy sim elements, and it's being developed and published by Taleworlds, who, as a developer, is kind of on the smaller size, with their employees only totaling barely over 100, which makes what they have actually managed to accomplish thus far so much more impressive. As the game's so expansive, the easiest place to start would be the beginning, because, well, let's face it, why would you start in the middle? That would make no sense at all. So, let's start with character creation, and right off the bat you're going to get to customize how your character looks. You can choose from either a male or a female, you can change your height, your skin color, and your voice. There's several different accents to choose from, and you can also change the pitch, and it often has some pretty hilarious effects. From there, you're going to have all of the usual suspects when it comes to character customization, from facial shape to eye color, right through to hair and markings, and there is plenty here to keep you busy. So much so, in fact, a lot of people, like myself, will end up on this screen for potentially an hour or more, getting the character just right. On the other hand, for those of you that just want to jump right into the action, you could always just smash the randomizer button a few times and hope for the best. So, what do you do after you've made the perfect avatar? Well, it's an RPG, so you get to choose your skills, of course. To pick your skills and attributes, you choose your character's backstory as they grow up, which I think is a pretty nice touch, and it gives a character more life than simply going through and picking a bunch of stats and perks arbitrarily, like most games. Also, depending on the choices that you make, it will not only determine your starting stats and skills, but it will determine the gear that you start out with. So, if you want to be a trader, you can, but the gear loadout that you will most likely end up with is going to be cloth and a weak weapon. On the other hand, if you choose a warrior backstory, you will have much better armor and weapons. Each approach has its advantages and disadvantages, and it also quite heavily affects the tools that you will have at your disposal when it comes to tackling the game. Take, for instance, if you go deep into specializing as a warrior and end up neglecting your intelligence tree. While you might be able to take out a heavily armored horseman in a single blow, it's probably going to take you at least 50% longer to put up a trebuchet to knock down that enemy castle wall that you're trying to assault. The extra time spent building siege engines could give the enemy army time to attack your siege encampment, or even worse, give them time to siege one of your own castles. So every decision has a trade-off. Skills also get their max level cap determined by how deeply invested in them you are. So if you spread your focus and attribute points across all areas, it may make you a jack of all trades, but you'll soon find that you will be the master of none. And some of the 225 plus point perks in the skill trees can be truly game changing, giving you extra troops, more damage, legendary crafted weapons, or even the ability to trade other lords' fiefs off them for cold hard cash, saving you needing to attack a castle at all. The sheer depth of the skill trees gives the game a huge amount of replayability and character customization. The skill trees aren't just invest points and get better either, because not only do you get a flat bonus per skill point you earn, you'll get to choose new perks for every 25 that you actually accrue, allowing you to specialize and improve your character even further. And the list is long and extensive, so choosing your character progression path really carries meaningful weight. So you have the ultimate character design in their childhood picked out. You're ready to go headlong into Caldaria. So what comes next? Well, you will be presented with the option to take part in a short tutorial, but it only really gives you the very basics, and it doesn't really do much in the way of holding your hand. It teaches you some of the more basic combat controls with a handful of different weapon types pitting you against basic and advanced enemies, a few pots, and a windmill. Yes, a windmill. Once you clear the combat training, the game will show you how to buy food, recruit a few troops, and go find some bandits to push around. Or be killed by. Enable permadeath at your own risk. What the tutorial doesn't tell you is that some weapons have different modes, so if a weapon has a one or two-handed option listed, pressing X will actually switch between one or two-handed modes. It also doesn't tell you that a couching lance needs you to press X once you reach the required speed to lower your lance into the position for massive bonus damage instead of the usual pull back left or right on your mouse for a directional swing. These are things that you're expected to figure out on your own, and it can get a little bit frustrating when you're wondering why that awesome lance you bought works just like every single other spear you bought. The game also fails to tell you that as a trader you can actually run caravans and workshops for some extra money, or that of course the economy is dynamic and will react to what's happening in the local area. For example, sieges will cause food shortages, and as such, food prices will skyrocket. On the other hand, if there is peace in an area and the lords keep the local bandits at bay, a village will grow, produce more, and it'll drive prices down. So taking supplies from a quiet area of the map to a war-torn area of the map can be quite lucrative, provided of course that the locals actually like you. These are all things that at this stage of the game's development you are simply expected to find out for yourself by exploring and talking to the NPCs of the world. Which isn't the worst thing in the world, but it does make for quite the steep learning curve at times. Moving on from the tutorial mission, unless you skipped it of course, you are tasked with finding and talking to at least 10 different lords to get each of their stories about Nazareth's Folly, which was a battle that ripped the Empire apart and put Caldaria into its current state of civil war, where no single faction seems to be able to agree on who should rule. Once that is done, you'll be able to form your own kingdom or join another faction in order to unify or destroy the Empire as you see fit. And sadly, that's about as far as the story goes. While that's the abridged version, I didn't really have to shorten it much. So if there isn't a lot of story, what's the hook? Well, it's because there is so much to do in Caldaria that you inadvertently end up writing your own stories as you go. Small sub-dramas unfold, rivalries ignite. For example, one particular playthrough I had decided that I was going to join Sturgia, the faction who are largely inspired by the Norse Vikings. I designed my female character to look like a Norse shield maiden, and off I set to marry a Norse lord and raid my way up and down the Caldarian Empire. My plans unfortunately went awry when my would-be spouse turned me down, and thus began the epic saga of betrayal and revenge of a jilted lover hell-bent on destroying everything her would-be husband held dear. I proceeded to march my way across the map to join the faction he was at war with, married the son of the king, and led my warband on a fiery crusade cutting a bloody swathe across the entire empire till I finally found myself in Sturgeon territory, where I proceeded to lop off the heads of his entire family. Spen unfortunately slipping out of my grasp on at least 6 occasions, which of course only fueled my lust for revenge at being jilted even more. It took me conquering the entire rest of the realm before I managed to actually corner and catch him. He was cowering in a forest near his old home castle, the castle of course now being firmly in my control. The man in front of me was broken. He had no men left and not a brass dinar to his name, or a single friend or family member left to come to his aid. In this moment, I felt for a fleeting microsecond the pang of pity for the broken man in front of me, who I had originally intended to crush Caldaria with, and in that moment I hesitated. Axe above my head, I paused. Then I remembered the trail of blood that had led me to this very moment, and down came my axe, ending this character's story arc with a decisive, blood-chilling crunch. 400 hours in, and that character arc was by far the most fun that I've had so far. The story pretty much just wrote itself, and even with the limited dialogue options and possible character interactions, I was more than happy to fill in a lot of the blanks that are left by the game. And if reading the Mountain Blade subreddit is anything to go by, it's a sentiment that is shared by a large part of the ever-expanding community. The upside of a light story is you really do get to choose your own path. You aren't simply shoehorned into needing an arbitrary skill check like needing to pass a certain speech level to progress. You just get to tackle getting to the top of the dog pile any way you see fit, and there are many ways of approaching Mountain Blade 2. And a big part of that is combat, so well, what makes the combat so damn good? For starters, there is a huge selection of weapons to choose from, and then on top of that, if you so choose, there is an even larger number of customizable weapons that you can craft yourself, as long of course as you can stomach some of the somewhat painful grind of sitting and waiting for days to tick by to get your stamina back, to continue doing a small amount of smithing, to then wait another day out and not be able to do anything else, to do a small amount of smithing. Well, you get the idea. I really do hope that they tweak it a little, because at the moment it has a ton of potential. It just gets marred by a stamina gate that just doesn't need to be there. Or honestly, it would be fine if it recharged while you did other things instead of just having to sit on your hands in town and wait. Weapons are divided into categories by skill type. Melee has one-handed, two-handed and pole arms. Ranged has bows, crossbows and thrown weapons. However, weapons come in many flavors, such as swords, axes, maces, daggers, thrown axes, spears, lances, both long and short bows, just to name a few. As I said, the list is extensive, and if you can't find a weapon in your flavor, I truly don't know what to say. The drawback of such a big variety is that it makes the crafting system for weapons so huge it takes absolutely forever to unlock all the options, and unfortunately it can make it pretty frustrating trying to get that one weapon blade you want. Some of this would be alleviated, of course, if it didn't have that stamina gate, because you could just wander around and do things, knock out a couple of weapons, keep going. It would take 90% of the frustration out of it. I've also heard on the grapevine that armor crafting is coming, and that's just going to exponentially increase the numbers. So with any luck, like I said, they tweak it to make it far less grindy. The actual combat itself can also be a tiny bit frustrating at first. Low skill with a weapon makes weapon handling pretty clumsy. Combine that with the swipe left, up, down, right mechanic, and it's going to have you throwing your view all over the place as you're attempting to simply strafe around your opponent's blows, or you might just be trying to correct where you're actually looking on screen. So to start with, it can be a little tedious to learn, but once you do, it kind of settles out a little bit and it's not quite so bad. The thing that's going to get you the most, however, is just how much of an effect speed has on your damage. The first time that I charged down a looter on my horse, who was armed incidentally only with a pitchfork, I was thinking to myself that he was going to be pretty easy prey. Soon after that, I was taught which end of the stick was pointy, as I found my ass on the ground with 0 hit points, only to be dragged around as a prisoner for 3 days by the would-be lowest form of combatant in the game. Lesson learned. Well, sort of. But by far what makes Mountain Blade 2 so much fun to play is commanding your own army. And while it takes some getting used to, because there are so many options that range from formations right through to simply how your units are going to move, and you need to learn all of these keyboard shortcuts in real time while you have enemy arrows, swords and lances all being hurled in your direction at once. Alternately, you do have the option to set unit command to the AI, but who really wants to play an army control sim and not control their army? The shortcuts can be a little bit of a headache to get your head around to start with, but once you learn them and really sink your teeth into the fact that having tactics, a solid, well thought out army composition, and being able to react quickly to the ever changing battlefield, it really can be the difference between a resounding victory and a solid thrashing. And it's at that point you will become quite thankful for all the options at your disposal. Some battles in fact end up being so close and fierce that I quite often find myself more in the army command position, moving my troops around the battlefield as effectively as possible and simply staying in a position that I can survey the entire battlefield from rather than actually getting in and mixing it up with sword and bow. You will also have to learn exceedingly quickly that if you fall in battle, your troops will very quickly lose their heads, even if you outnumber and outgear the enemy, simply because of the massive effect that morale loss has on the battlefield. Troops really don't like it when their commander dies. Not only will they break formation, they basically just run around doing whatever they feel like. And an undisciplined army is a dead army. So be ever vigilant of those hit points. Speaking of just how important morale is to the game, a simple, well-placed surprise cavalry charge into the exposed flank of an enemy that you've already heavily peppered with arrow fire can end a fight that you are outnumbered 2-1 in before the enemy even hit your shield wall. Morale adds yet another element of depth to combat, and so much so that it may actually have you hesitate about taking too many base level units into your army at once, or in the least splitting the fresh recruits into a different unit that you can hold back in reserve, as your elite, heavy, well experienced troops may not take too kindly to watching waves of their cloth wearing peasant brethren die next to them, and the result may well be that they simply turn tail and run, causing you to, of course, lose all of your elite units to morale loss. Of course, should your enemy drag along a huge amount of recruit level troops in their army, which happens surprisingly often as you need to train and level up your troops through perks and actual combat, you can use exactly the same tactic against them and target their weaker units in order to break the morale of the elite units, saving a potentially huge amount of losses on your side of the field. To start with, however, you aren't going to need to worry too much about morale, as starting out you're going to be sharpening your skills against lowly looters, haha, yeah, I know I got my butt kicked by one, and bandits, and they come in several flavors, each of which has their own diverse troop tiers and types that are as diverse as a regular army, and they can include anything from foot troops and archers to cavalry and mounted archers, some of which, if you manage to capture and recruit them, can actually be leveled up into some of the most powerful units in the game. So underestimate them at your own peril. As you win battles, you will be awarded with Renown, and it's this Renown that is needed to increase your clan tier. At higher clan tiers, you will get the option to recruit more companions, and it also gives you and your followers the ability to lead larger armies. At certain clan tiers, it will also unlock the ability to gain an audience with lords without having to simply bribe their guards, and some lord level quests won't actually be available until you reach at least clan tier 2. Thankfully, there are plenty of tasks to keep you busy, gaining the renown that you're going to need to accomplish this goal, from quests at village, town and lord levels, each with increasing difficulty. For example, you may just have to take some cows to market for a local farmer. Then again, you may be butting heads with a local gang leader at the town level, while a noble may task you with finding a new home for some troublesome mercenaries, or even training their son for combat. You can also gain a small amount of renown by winning tournaments, and tournaments are pretty good for getting some mid-tier armor and weapons early game. Not to mention you can get steeds and scratch that gambling itch and win a little bit of extra coin. If fighting isn't your forte, you can also gain renown through trading by taking perks in the trading tree, which will give your workshops the artisan status, and thus, as long as they produce a profit, will increase your renown on a daily basis. But what can you actually do once you start unlocking some clan tiers? Well, at Clan Tier 1 you can pledge your sword to a kingdom as a mercenary at first, and you'll be awarded gold based on how many enemies you defeat. Bandits, however, are not included. Only enemies of factions you are at war with count towards this total. At Clan Tier 2, you can progress the story far enough to create your own kingdom, provided you find your way to get yourself a castle or a town, be the acquisition through trade or violence, or alternatively you could just swear an oath of fealty to a faction lord, which will not only let you create your own armies, but it will give you an entire faction as allies, and this can be really handy when you first start your conquest of Caldaria, not to mention the chance to be granted towns and castles that are conquered by your own faction. This is where the fun truly begins, as you go from fighting bandits in small groups to raiding villages, fighting armies that number in their thousands, as well as sieging towns and castles. That's of course not saying that you can't do all of the lower tier activities like joining your local tourney, or, you know, if you really want to take those villages, cows to market, go for it. That said, you're almost constantly going to be at war, so it's going to keep you very busy. If you do choose to start your own faction, be warned, because as the main questline stands, it will eventually put you up against the entirety of Caldaria all at once, so don't say I didn't warn you. For your first playthrough, I thoroughly suggest picking a faction that you like and joining them, at least until you get a handle on everything that's going on in the world. Thankfully, there are several to choose from, and each have drawn inspiration from real-world empires from throughout history. The Empire, for example, are based on the Roman and Greek empires and have relatively well-balanced troop types. The Valadians, on the other hand, are a feudal people who resemble the Norman civilization and specialize in heavy armor that comes in both cavalry and infantry varieties, while their ranged units are also very heavily armored crossbowmen. The Sturgians like big shields, mail armor, and throwing weapons. They draw their inspiration from the Rus people, more commonly known as the Norse or Vikings. The Britannians draw inspiration from the Celts and specialize in guerrilla-type warfare, having some of the most powerful archers in the game. The Asurai are the desert-dwelling people who are based on the pre-Islamic Arabs. Favoring mobility, they have fast cavalry and lots of lightly armored spearmen. The Khuzaits are drawn from the Mongols, and as such they enjoy fast horse archers but lack any real heavily armored troops. So while they dominate the open plains of the steppe, they tend to struggle when it comes to attacking castles, relying on pretty much starving out a castle or town's garrison, using hit and run tactics on the local caravans and villages. There is also between 1 and 3 minor clans of mercenaries per major faction that each have their own unique troop lines, so troop variety is huge and you're never just limited to only taking your faction's troop type. In fact, in a lot of cases you're going to end up recruiting the enemy troop types from their conquered villages, as troops can only be picked up from their own respective regions, which presents its own set of challenges and the need to adjust your tactics as you go. For example, it's no good trying to form a shield wall with your new recruits if they don't come with shields. So you've joined yourself a faction and acquired yourself a town, or perhaps you just managed to trade for one. Then again, you could also be crazy and have attacked a castle, gone to war with an entire faction, and simply created your own kingdom. What now? Well, once you get your own castle or town, you're going to have to worry about feeding your people as well as keeping them safe, not only from bandits but from other factions who are quite happy to raid your villages, attack your caravans and siege your towns and castles, which will wreak absolute havoc on your economy and food productions. However, you can of course keep your fief safe by doing regular patrols to drive off any would-be aggressors, your companions, any hired mercenaries, and the other lords of your faction can also help with this. You'll also have the option to make improvements to your towns and castles through building projects, which can increase things like garrison size, militia training, increasing food production, and building siege workshops to speed up the building of defences in the event that your fief does in fact get sieged. If you keep your towns happy and safe, they will prosper, giving you additional taxes through a better economy. On the other hand, if you neglect your fiefs, you will lose villages to bandits and raids, the economy will suffer, and you will lose troops from your militia and garrison to starvation, leaving your new shiny castle as easy pickings for an enemy army. And losing a castle also comes with a more indirect cost, because losing face with your faction's lords can have them straight up leave your army if if they dislike you enough, or even defect the faction altogether. So there's a reputation system too? Why yes, there is. Each individual lord and notable has a 100 positive to 100 negative possibility swing in their opinion of you, and it can affect things from your ability to recruit troops from a town notable character, right through to the ability to negotiate an enemy lord's defection to your side, and as such, really shouldn't be taken lightly. When I refer to a notable character, they could be anything from the local farmer in a village to the gang leader in a town. And depending on how much they do or don't like you, will very heavily dictate how many troops, if any, he or she will allow you to recruit from them at any given time. So being stranded in enemy territory, having all the villagers hate you because you raided them before taking the castle, on one side of the coin, taking the castle would have been easier because less troops in the garrison because you starved them out. On the other hand, well, you're going to have to fix your reputation before you can get any more troops. As it stands right now, there are few quests and they are pretty sparsely available, so reputation is something that really needs to be nurtured if you plan on recruiting troops, being able to summon lords to your aid, or keeping them in your faction at all. Thankfully, doing quests isn't the only way to raise your standing with someone. In the case of villagers, killing local bandit leaders and destroying their hideouts raises it a little, as does saving groups of villagers or caravans from bandit attacks. You can also spend time in one of your faction's towns to raise your reputation with the local notables, as it will grow a little each day as you are considered to be fortifying the town and providing extra security with your army. As far as your fellow nobles go, you can vote on their side on various bills that will affect your faction in various ways, or you can support them gaining new fiefs that are taken, and sometimes they may even have a quest or two that you can do. Just keep in mind that the nobles that you vote against will like you a little less. The effects of this can be diminished, however, if you have a high enough charm skill, because your gains will be far higher than your losses. One particular playthrough, my charm was high enough that a full 300 influence vote would gain me 130 positive with whoever I voted with, while only sustaining a 15 loss on the person I voted against. But someone with a low investment in charm, I can imagine it could be quite tricky to navigate the political landscape without getting at least some of your own faction offside. On the plus side, to navigate this treacherous landscape, you will have companions, and the higher your clan tier, the more you'll be able to recruit. There are also perks that can be gained through various skill trees that will increase this cap too, though so far I've yet to actually get one to work properly. Hopefully this is something that they fix soon. Each companion is just like you in the fact that they can be equipped with their own gear, their skills can be leveled up in exactly the same fashion as your character, and as such they can become very powerful allies and party commanders. They are also exceedingly good at filling in the gaps in your skill tree. For example, if you happen to be a terrible scout, you could hire a companion that's got a really high scout skill, have them in your party, and their scout skill will overwrite your skill, thus giving you all of their benefits without having to suffer through basically not being able to spot anything. The same can also be said for a lot of the other skills, such as engineering or medicine. So if you don't want to invest in that particular tree, but you still want to go and siege castles, better go find yourself an engineer. In addition to companions, you can get married. To do so, you must convince your prospective spouse through dialogue that you are worthy and share similar interests to them on at least 2 occasions. Then you must find their parent and pay their dowry. The bonus is that your spouse won't take up a companion slot. They get put into your family tree instead, and if you spend time with them in town, you actually have a chance to sire children that, after 18 in-game years, will turn into their own character and act just like other companions. Of course, they will still be under your own family tree. In fact, in one particular playthrough I had managed to have more than 20 children with Awa, so you can see that this could be quite the snowball effect if you spend too much time in town. Like, clearly I did. Obviously, 18 years is a ridiculously long time, even in this game. Only in one playthrough have I actually managed to raise a child to age, and they were bugged, with all their stats being 0, all their skills also being 0, and they had negative 100 skill points needed to even get their first level. But that said, until a patch ago, you could purchase fiefs for free if you got the Everything Has a Price perk from the trader tree. And boy did that get patched fast after the Spiffing Brit did a video about it. So with any luck, they start fixing up the very end game perks. I don't think anybody's supposed to have spent 400 hours in the game and actually gotten to those points yet, but we're getting there now, guys, so tap tap tap, can you fix them soon please? Getting back to companions though, they are randomly generated every time you start a new campaign, and so your campaign's going to be a little different every time you restart. This does add variety to your playthrough, though every now and again I have managed to wind up with basically only combat oriented options with no traders, Dr. Smiths or builder options being available at all. So getting companions to plug holes in your skill tree to actually fill out the roles within the clan, such as surgeon or engineer, can be somewhat difficult. But it is something that Taleworlds are definitely working on, as the original starting companions that you used to be able to recruit were essentially super soldiers right off the bat, something that was recently toned down to make them more realistic and be able to actually be leveled up and molded as you see fit. You can also create parties with your companions, which in turn can either be let roam the land looking for trouble. They will also do patrols around your fief, or you can actually summon them to your army. The bonus of this is that their parties are customizable by you, so you can recruit and change the troops in them as you see fit. Not only that, they don't cost you any influence to summon to your side or to maintain in your army, and this can be huge, especially when you are just starting out with a faction, as summoning lords that aren't in your clan can carry a pretty hefty influence cost, not to mention maintaining cohesion within your army will cost you even more influence points over time, so it's very much something to keep in mind when you're actually putting together your army. Companions can also recruit and train their own troops. You'll also get a cut of their spoils of war. Just keep in mind that you do also have to foot the bill for their troops, so if they can't find any enemies to defeat and loot to sell, well, the cost for troops is going to add up pretty quickly. So how does the game actually perform? Well, as far as performance goes, the graphics are actually pretty good. Set to Ultra on my 1060 i7 ROG Strix, it handles open field battles up to the maximum allowable 1000 unit relatively well. It does, however, start to stutter under heavy fighting, and I can't record without turning the settings down, or my poor PC has a small heart attack. During sieges, on the other hand, if I'm recording, which face it, I basically always am, I have to drop the quality to medium and lower the units on field to 600, and it still stutters, presumably from all the extra detail in the castle that has to be rendered. Performance issues during sieges seem to be a bit of a work in progress at the moment, as it's been mostly during this current patch that I'm having the most crashes. And I say it's a work in progress as over the last few patches they've solved quite a lot of issues with pathing. For example, troops will now climb up 2 of the 3 ladders on a siege tower, whereas a patch or 2 ago they would only climb up 1, which pretty much made the siege tower a worse option than just throwing ladders against the walls. Speaking of pathing issues, and it's really not uncommon that a troop will get stuck in a wall and literally become unreachable, meaning that you have to retreat from the fight and return just to oust 1 or 2 stuck troops from their wall. That said, the graphics are actually really good, especially on the scale of the size of the battles. Turned up to ultra, and that moment that you notice the glint of the sun as it rises over the dunes of your battlefield just gives that odd sense of peace and calm amongst some serious chaos. And the environments themselves within the game are actually hugely varied. You've got castles, towns and villages all being split between several varieties, and each faction has their own unique types on top, which is a welcome change from the somewhat of a plague the gaming industry has at the moment with recycled assets of the copy paste of assets that are just flipped over and over again with little more than a repaint. Or hell, let's face it, even if we're lucky enough to get the repaint. Each faction has their own distinct style and architecture. Quite a few of the towns are entirely unique designs, and if you upgrade the level of a town's walls, it actually changes the appearance of the castle itself. It truly does make sieging a castle feel like a seriously monumental event, and if I was to say that my first siege didn't give me some serious butterflies as I was marching up to the walls with my troops and siege engines, all while fireballs were being hurled at and from the walls of the enemy castle, I would be lying. It was a truly amazing experience. And the open field battles are just as diverse, and there are several maps for each region, some being wide open, some being closed in mountain passes, or even heavily wooded forests, each giving you new challenges to deal with. You find out pretty quickly that cavalry don't much like forests or closely packed in villages much. On the other hand, archers love shooting at cavalry in forests and close packed villages. So you really do come to understand that you're going to have to adjust your tactics depending on what region you're in. Not to mention things like cavalry have to walk during sieges because horses are really bad at climbing walls. But hey, that's all part of the fun. There really is no one size fits all, or these one kind of troops are all that you're going to need to take because they are so brokenly unbalanced. You're going to need to plan your strategy, train your troops, plan your assault, all the while defending your home territories. So, all in all, what's the final verdict? Well, the game's pretty buggy, it's very janky at times, it crashes on me with varying frequency depending on what patch happens to be live at the time, and in some areas is pretty well unbalanced. On the plus side, the exploits are being patched out with rapid succession, and I'm pretty sure once again we can thank the Spiffing Brits videos for a lot of those patches. The game does also feel a long way from finished. It needs just so much more polish and balancing. Also, a little bit more filling out in general, mostly surrounding questing, as reputation is such an integral part of the game, so taking that and adding some more variety and just making quests in general easier to access, because at the moment they are sparse. You can go for a week in game without running into a quest giver, which can drive you up the wall. Being again that reputation is just such an integral part of the game, it would take so much grind out of it. But at the end of the day, the game is just straight up stupidly fun, and the fact that there are just so many different ways that you can actually tackle the game that are already implemented, it gives it a serious amount of replayability. As I said, I'm over 400 hours in at the time of recording, and I am far from done from the game. So definitely watch this space. I really could talk about this game for hours, and the more I play, the more I discover, not to mention that every week there's new patches with various changes, fixes and game balances, so the game that I talk about today could be a very different one in a month's time. I will definitely be checking back in regularly to watch what the game is doing progress wise, and judging by the very active community on Steam that has already hit over 170,000 people, not to mention the devs over at Taleworlds are actually listening to the very active Mountain Blade subreddit community, hopefully the final product's going to be something that people will be playing for years. The fact that there is already mod support for the game also makes me think that we're definitely going to be in for a very, very long ride. Now, if you're here, there's probably a pretty good chance that you've played it already, so drop me a comment below and let me know what you think about the game. I'd love to hear from you. Now, if you've made it this far, you know the meme. Smash that like button to appease the algorithm gods. My name's Azkriel, and as always, thank you for watching. See you all next time. Peace.